From Washington, the McLaughlin Group, the American original. For over 3 decades, the sharpest minds, best sources, hardest talk.
Issue 1, U.S. versus ISIS.
The president is seeking to implement a strategy that has shown some success in Kobani, inside Syria. We have had some success against an ISIL leader in Syria just over the weekend who was taken off the battlefield. The president feels very strongly that the very significant problems that are faced by people in Syria, for example, are not problems that the United States is going to come in and solve for them. We're not going to impose a solution on Syria. We're not going to commit billions of dollars and the lives of of hundreds of thousands of our men and women in uniform to trying to solve those problems.
President Obama's strategy against the Islamic State, also known as ISIL and ISIS, is attracting new scrutiny because in recent days the Islamic State has seized Ramadi, the capital of Iraq's massive western province Anbar, and the ancient city of Palmyra, Syria. This gives the Islamic State near dominance of the major arterial highway linking Syria's capital, Damascus, all the way to Iraq's capital, Baghdad. 8 months ago, President Obama began his campaign against the Islamic State. But today, Iraqi forces are retreating, and the Iraqi Prime Minister, Abadi, is being forced to rely upon Iran-linked Shia militias to fight the Islamic State. Militias detested by Sunnis for their long record of sectarian atrocities. And the Islamic State is spreading. It now has armed supporters in nations including Afghanistan, Indonesia, Lebanon, Libya, Pakistan, the Philippines, Nigeria, Tunisia, and Yemen. Thousands of Westerners have also joined the Islamic State, including many Europeans who have returned home to plot attacks. Still, the White House insists patience is the key.
Are we going to light our hair on fire every time that there is a setback in the campaign against ISIL? Or are we going to take very seriously our responsibility to evaluate those areas where we succeed and evaluate where steps are necessary for us to change our strategy where we've sustained setbacks?
Question. President Obama's strategy to defeat ISIS is based on first beating ISIS in Iraq and subsequently dealing with it in Syria. Why is ISIS still gaining ground in Iraq? Pat Buchanan.
Well, John, let's talk about the Obama strategy. He has no strategy for Syria, and ISIS just gathered in Palmyra, one of the major cities. In Iraq, the policy of Barack Obama is failing, and it is failing quite clearly because the Iraqi government and army is simply insufficient to defend Ramadi, Anbar, or take back Mosul in and of itself. Therefore, they will have to rely on the only forces there that can, which are the Shia militia, which Iran backs. But that would be a victory for Iran. John, and my feeling here is there's going to be a push, and I hope the Republicans don't get in on it, to put American troops in there to take back Ramadi and Fallujah and Mosul, or lead the battle in there. And that's going to be a great battle inside the United States. And I think, but let me just say this, that's going to be, the next 2 years is going to be the battle inside the Republican Party.
Yeah, let Eleanor in.
The president is right to say this is not America's fight. This is the fight of the people in the region, and that U.S. forces will assist the forces on the ground there. Problem is that the sectarian divisions run strong, and General Dempsey, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, said that the Iraqi army did they did not get expelled from Ramadi. They literally just drove out of Ramadi. They were not going to put their lives at risk to save the Sunni population. And so now we are forced basically to cooperate with the Shiite militias, and I think there will be more coordinated airstrikes, and I think that's an appropriate thing, although it's tricky because they are in many ways directed by Iran. But the president is right to show restraint. U.S. forces are not going to go in any kind of numbers into either of these conflicts. And the fall of Palmyra is actually a defeat for Assad. I mean, that's his turf.
Here's the problem, though, right? we're not talking about a reinvasion. The president pretends that's the case. But we look at the map at the moment. Where does ISIS control now? They control Ramadi. They control Palmyra, which links up to Deir ez-Zor, and then down to Al-Qaim, which is on the border with Iraq, and then along to Ramadi, to Baghdad. They have a huge territory. And the reason I say that we need special forces on the ground in limited numbers to do air controlling, so that if some guy goes and hides behind a building or moves there, we can target them. Why are there limited airstrikes? Because we don't know where they are a lot of the time. The strategy is clearly not working. And the reason I would disagree with Pat and Eleanor is that the problem is their problems are our problems, because absent our interlocutor power that we've bought with political influence, bringing moderate parties together, it's not just Shia versus Sunni, they resort to the extremes. The Shia militias now, when they go into Ramadi, will start executing Sunnis, driving the Sunnis into ISIS. So you have two fringes: Iran, Khomeiniism on one side, Salafi jihadism, ISIS on the other side, pitting against each other. That ends up in Europe. It eventually ends up here. It destabilizes the world.
We have to do hold on, Mark.
Right.
Look, we have very important allies in that part of the world, and they have been our allies for a long time. They're not perfect, but Saudi Arabia and the Emirates and Jordan, for example, and Egypt, they are all up in arms over all of this because they realize that without American support, that whole region might go to the very radical parts of that community, and that would be a disaster not only for them, but for
troops in that case. Why don't they volunteer troops
They're
and send them? They're all waiting for the Americans to come and fight their war for them, and it is not primarily America's war; it is their war.
It's also a lot of anti-American sentiment
but it is in our interest to make sure that the radicals do not take over that
There
part
are
of the world.
radicals on both sides.
There's a lot of anti-American sentiment on the ground there,
Yeah.
and sending in troops in great numbers would be. I agree with Tom to the extent they do need some people to control the airstrikes, and I think the fact that the Sunni Provincial Council requested the Shiite militias to come in opens the door for the administration to work with them.
Which we haven't given them because Obama's been upset,
Obama,
worried about upsetting Iran.
They're sending anti-tank
All right, I want to get 2 points.
time.
I want to get 2 points in there. Obama famously dismissed ISIS as the, quote, junior varsity, unquote, in a New Yorker interview in early 2014. Is he still underestimating the threat from ISIS?
The administration, from the president to the Pentagon to the State Department, all underestimated the strength of ISIS. And in taking over Ramadi, they had 30 attacks by vehicles, and 10 of them were at the strength of what happened in Oklahoma City in this country a number of years ago. So they have resources, and they have fighters coming from 100 countries around the world. So I think it's really shocking to the administration how this force has gotten so significant. Plus their use of social media launches them into a whole other world of war fighting.
Exit question. Is Obama losing the war against ISIS? Yes or no?
U.S. strategy is not succeeding. It is failing in Iraq, and we have none for Syria.
It's a policy of containment, and it is a policy of containment. It's not a policy of victory.
What do you think?
Well, the container is overflowing with chaos.
Right, and we are going to be pushed out of large parts of the world. We're going to lose our allies there. It's going to have a huge effect over the next couple of decades on America's interests.
It's coming here.
He needs a new national security team. Issue 2, failing the fallen.
I just slashed my chest really bad. Multiple times at first time, and then I just kept going and trying to get rid of it, and then I guess I just felt more concentrated on the pain that I was from the cut than anything else. So I was thinking about ending it right there, but I don't know. I guess if I wasn't in my right senses, if I would have been more, or if I would have had the means, I probably would have taken my life.
That was Sergeant Blanco of the 101st Air Assault Division of the United States Army. After a combat tour in Afghanistan, Sergeant Blanco engaged in a period of alcohol abuse and self-harm and actively considered suicide. But his suffering is far from a unique one. In 2013, the number of active duty military personnel who committed suicide grew to 286. There are many reasons for military and/or veteran suicides, and a recent study conducted by Dr. Mark Rieger and published by JAMA Psychiatry, Dr. Rieger and his co-authors found that blaming suicides on deployment is not fair. Dr. Rieger's study found that of the 5,041 military suicides in an 8-year span between October 2001 and December 2009, an estimated 23% of suicides were by service members who had deployed, but 77% of suicides were by service members who had not. One major problem is that service personnel worry they will be shunned or blacklisted if they request psychiatric assistance. Sergeant Blanco explains.
And I was trying to hide it from my drills and from my fellow soldiers. I don't want them to think I was just like awkward. I don't want to have any. I don't want to have any. How do you say it? I didn't want to be singled out, in other words, so I just kept my mouth shut.
But there is hope. The stigma of post-traumatic stress and the days of limited solutions are fading. Leadership also matters. Blanco explains that his sergeant's support helped him to get better.
At least now I can say that I can be like, okay, I can go on. And that things will get better eventually.
Question, bearing in mind that approximately 22 veterans commit suicide every day, what must we do to reduce military and veteran suicides as Memorial Day is here? Walt Zuckerman.
I don't have an answer to that because this is a very serious matter for a lot of these people. I can understand when people go to war and they're in very different environments and they see their own colleagues being injured and have to deal with this every day, that you get to be a little bit depressed about it. And, you know, there's no way of getting away from that kind of experience in war. But I don't have any solutions to that.
Well, this is a reminder, though, when people talk cavalierly of why don't we just send 10,000 soldiers over to the Middle East. We're not only talking about the costs on the battlefield, but these are costs that extend for decades later. The Army is getting more sophisticated about this. They're now putting more mental health personnel into the field. They're trying to reduce the stigma that this young man really talked about. And there's now a new phrase that's entered the lexicon. It's called mental wounds. And they can be every bit as significant, more significant as physical wounds that you can see.
John, let me say that, look, the suicide is the 10th leading cause of death in the United States, but it's second for those 18 to 24. And while actually women attempt suicide, as I understand it, more often, men commit 4 out of 5 suicides. And the major reason you get, and it could have to do with the military, is the depression of the individuals because of relationships that have gone wrong. It could be you could be more suicides because they get away from their friends, their band of brothers, their platoon, their company, and they go back to their districts and they're all alone, you know. Right. So I think there's a lot of things wrong here, but it's not simply the military.
It's not just about tours, it's about leadership as well at the senior NCO, actually junior NCO level, lieutenants, knowing that if one of your guys or girls has a problem, that they can come and talk to you and engage. And look, I haven't been in the military. My grandfather was speaking to yesterday, Pacific Marine. He went on Okinawa when he was 19. Similar, he doesn't like to talk about it. This war is inherently horrific, and I think Eleanor is right. I do think we should be more aggressive in Iraq, but it's easy for me to say. But I do have, platoon commander friends and other guys who've been. Look, we need to have a system that there is. If people want to seek PTS help or traumatic brain injury, they can get it very quickly. They can get it effectively. And you know what? This is one thing. Hopefully, we can all agree. Whatever that costs, we pay it.
Exit question. Assign a letter from A to F to the U.S. government's handling of suicide prevention for veterans. Pat Buchanan.
I'm really not that familiar with it, but I'm sure there are people that are making an outstanding effort. There may be people that aren't, so I'd give them a B.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
What do you think?
I would agree. I think it's very difficult to figure out how you deal with people who are young, who are away from their homes. They're in a terrible environment if they're in the midst of a war. This is not going to be an easy solution, easily solved problem, no matter who it is.
I would say it's an E originally, a few years ago, and now to a C+. A lot more to be done, but a lot has been done.
It's higher than a C+. It's a B-. Issue 3, high hacking.
Part of the reason why it's so flipping easy is you look at the servers that are serving the in-flight entertainment as well as the cabin control systems. It's embedded architecture that, because of how FAA doesn't allow rapid upgrades, it's sitting way behind the curve. So, one, change that process somehow or other. Number two, put better separation in place. And number three, the little box underneath the seat, you might want to protect that a little bit better. Or make the whole thing, not quite so hardwired in.
Last week, a Canadian news outlet, APTN, released a FBI search warrant from April 17th. The warrant pertained to computer expert Chris Roberts in response to a tweet he posted while on April 15th United Airlines flight from Chicago to Syracuse. Quote, "Find myself on a 737-800, box IFE ICE SATCOM. Shall we start playing with EICA's messages? Pass oxygen on. Anyone? Question mark. Mr. Roberts' insinuation that he could control the plane's emergency messaging system. But get this, the FBI warrant also states that on a different passenger flight, Mr. Roberts, quote-unquote, successfully commanded the system. He had access to issue the CLB, or climb command. He stated that he thereby caused one of the airplane engines to climb, resulting in a lateral or sideways movement of the plane during one of these flights. Yes, you heard that right. The FBI claims Mr. Roberts made a plane fly sideways. While Mr. Roberts has not been charged with any crime, the FBI says he told them he has hacked 15 to 20 flights between 2011 and 2014. Here's how Wired magazine describes the FBI's claims. Quote, unquote, he obtained physical access to the networks through the Seat Electronic Box, or SEB. These are installed two to a row on each side of the aisle under passenger seats on certain planes. After removing the cover to the SEB by, quote, wiggling and squeezing the box, unquote, Roberts told agents he attached a CAT6 Ethernet cable with a modified connector to the box and to his laptop, and then used default IDs and passwords to gain access to the in-flight entertainment system. Once on that network, he was able to gain access to other systems on the planes, unquote.
Question, is high hacking a serious threat, or is there something fishy about this incident? Tom Rogan.
Well, I think it's a serious problem in the sense that you have someone, it shows the complacency, but also the ignorance, actually, in terms of airlines and their security with these seat back that a guy was able to hack in. Is this easy to do? No. Will they improve it? Yes. But listen, it's a good example of, in the technological age, stuff that would once only exist in a Hollywood movie now exists horrifically in real life. Plane flying sideways.
I think his claims have been questioned, and unless you think he was suicidal, I don't think he did anything on these planes that jeopardized safety. If there's a problem in the system, I think they ought to get some experts, not necessarily him, looking at it, and it can be fixed. I'm not worried about it.
Are you going to be looking at your seat closely?
No, I'm not worried about it.
You're going to feel around underneath, and you're holding up the line?
No, I'm just going to try to keep the guy in front of me from pushing his seat back.
This is good news, John, in this sense. This guy has exposed a real vulnerability of airliners. And in a way, because it's a technical thing, the airlines and the federal authorities can do something to block that if they have to. Take the entertainment boxes out rather than let some guy fool under there and steer the plane. So I think all in all, it's a healthy revelation.
Security experts have already demonstrated that they can take remote control of automobiles that have electronic systems which interface with the internet. Isn't it inevitable that someone will try to hack a passenger aircraft if that can be done? Mort?
Oh, without question. I mean, but it doesn't mean we're all going to be comfortable with it. There are people who are going to understand the technology and will be able to play with whatever it is and can literally affect the entire flight.
Which poses a greater threat to commercial aviation, hackers or the widespread use of civilian drones? Ask you.
I think civilian drones is a potential difficulty. Certainly, if you look at what's happening with the White House and the Capitol, with people flying these little things around, that's going to continue to be an issue. But again, technology. We talked about future weapons recently in a different episode. We have to be astute to this. I would say one thing. People. It's a good industry to get into. Cybersecurity still is, still will be.
You remember President Obama bragging, I'll use that word, about the use of drones because it kept Americans and American lives safe, and therefore he favored very strongly drone usage. You remember all that?
There's blowback to every beneficial and development, John, no doubt about it, John. I am more fearful of these drones. I'm afraid somebody fooling around with one of these things is going to run them into an airliner on the way it's landing or something like that, and then we're all going to address that problem.
Have you ever had a drone deliver anything to your house?
Not yet, John.
No.
What would it be if it were?
I've seen a couple guys at the door I thought were drones, but I'm not.
A question, should the FAA ban the use of Wi-Fi zones and high-tech infotainment systems? Infotainment. I-N-F-O-T. What's that?
I think they ought to take a look at them and correct any
on
vulnerabilities.
Passenger airlines until it can be proven that they are invulnerable to hacking. Yes or no? Pat Buchanan,
Yes,
quickly.
yes.
Take a look at it, but I think they can make it safe.
What do you say?
Yeah, he said yes. I say yes as well, but I think they can fix it quite quickly.
Oh yes, absolutely. I'm with them on that all the way.
Yeah, I think it would be all excessive worry. Issue 4, Amtrak tragedy.
We've suffered a tragedy here in our city. 7 people have died as a result of a train derailment, which is a very unusual event. I don't believe that anyone standing here today has any memory of a derailment of this kind in 50 years.
8 Amtrak passengers were killed and over 200 others injured when their Amtrak train derailed on May 12 in Philadelphia. The train was on the busy Northeast Corridor route from Washington, D.C. to New York City. Investigators believe the crash occurred due to the train's excessive speed, reportedly 106 miles per hour, on entering a turn. Those investigators are now assessing whether the train's operating engineer was using his cell phone at the time of the crash. Still, according to transport expert Robert Halstead, the positive train control system currently being rolled out along the Northeast Corridor would likely have prevented the crash.
If it turns out to be one or both of those causes, positive train control would absolutely have prevented this accident.
Unfortunately, PTS had not yet been introduced at the location of the crash. Oddly, the day after the crash, the Republican-controlled House Transport Committee cut $251 million from Amtrak's funding. This sparked a fierce battle in Congress, with Democrats accusing the GOP of playing games with public safety.
Question, what is the current status of the probe into the derailment of the train number 188, and what do you think of Congress's behavior on this, the Republicans and the Democrats?
I think, well, the status of the investigation is that they're looking at whether the train engineer was potentially on his cell phone, whether something hit the train, but it's ongoing, it takes time. I actually, as surprising as it sounds, I have sympathy for cutting money to Amtrak because a lot of the routes are unprofitable. There is an infrastructure problem in this country, but there needs to be a fundamental reshaping. It will only work in terms of this Northeast Corridor, even if you take full costing, if it's high-speed rail. But Amtrak, as it stands at the moment, a lot of the routes are not used enough. They cost a lot of money, and remember, that money doesn't come from it. It's taxpayers, it's families who have to pay for that. We need reform of the system.
Actually, the Northeast Corridor is very profitable. What's costing money is from places in the middle of the country that are not well traveled, that are represented by Republicans who want to keep those routes going. And I think that's fine. I don't think there are any public transportation systems around the world that aren't subsidized in some way by government. And this boneheaded Congress, you need $500 million to fully implement that positive train control. They appropriate $50 million. I mean, all of this saving money, not spending money, when the interest rates are so low, it is a crime that we have not. It is a crime that we have not rebuilt the infrastructure in this country during this period when interest rates are virtually negative.
John, this appears to be human error in the cab. the 106 miles an hour. We've seen human error this summer, or excuse me, this spring, in the pilot's cabin, taking down airliners. I think the sooner we move to basically pilotless aircraft, and certainly in trains, when you got cars now that can drive themselves and stop themselves, so that you program it in that that train could not go more than 55 miles an hour when it goes around that curve. The sooner you get the people out and get the computers and the rest of it in, I think the better for security and safety.
Unless you have hackers.
I don't think you want to get the people out necessarily, but I think you do need that system that you just referred to.
Which seems more probable to you? That this tragedy was caused by a lack of funding for Amtrak, as Democrats like Congressman Israel allege, or that the cause was delay in rolling out new safety systems because of regulatory red tape, as Amtrak CEO Boardman maintains? Mort Zuckerman.
Well, I'm not familiar enough with the regulations as to why it was delayed, but there is no question but that this is something that must be put in these kinds of locations where they can, the technology can reduce the speed of the train, whatever the engineer or the conductor is doing. And they have amazingly new technologies to help protect against this very event.
Well, the deadline is the end of this year, and one of the problems in installing it is that you have to have the equipment talk to all the other equipment in the other trains that use all of those tracks. And that's not an easy or an inexpensive effort.
Predictions, Pat?
Those indictments of the 6 Baltimore cops have produced a police strike. And murders are up in that West Baltimore area by about 150%. I think you're going to have a real crisis in Baltimore this summer.
Rand Paul bolstered his flagging presidential campaign with his 10.5-hour speech against the Patriot Act, but I don't think he's going to be able to expand his voter base beyond what his father got.
Tom?
Expect major pushes from the Islamic State in the coming days. Any of your viewers look on the map, John, you can see they're controlling the lines of communication, the arterial highways. They may push towards Karbala or Baghdad. Big problem.
I'll check it out as soon as I get home. Mort?
I think it'll be interesting to see how the Saudis and other Arab countries now begin to seek work with Israel in order to protect themselves from ISIS.
This Memorial Day gives us a chance to take a pause and give thanks, silent thanks, to the generations of American soldiers who have sacrificed for the freedoms we enjoy, and bicker over, and if you see a soldier in uniform, say thanks in person. Bye-bye.